Survivors of ethnoviolence are vulnerable to many types of mental illness, such as depression, PTSD, and anxiety and grief disorders. Programs that specialize in helping survivors live normal, healthy lives have been developed and enacted over the past decades. These programs are developed by researching how different forms of ethnoviolence, such as genocide, racism, and hate crimes, affect the psyche and morale of individuals. Mental health professionals can apply this research to their practices and continue to discover how to better serve survivors in the future. This presentation takes a closer look at what research has been done concerning forms of ethnoviolence and how this research can be used to improve survivor mental health programs around the world. The Dallas Holocaust Museum's 10 Stages of Genocide help to identify the most harmful effects of ethnoviolence. This presentation will review and explore the following sections: classification and symbolization, dehumanization and discrimination, persecution and extermination, and perpetrator denial. These sections were chosen because they have the most relevance to impacts on mental health for survivors of various kinds of ethnoviolence. Some terms and definitions. An in-group is an exclusive, typically small group of people with a shared interest or identity. An out-group is those people who do not belong to a specific in-group. Ethnoviolence is an act or attempted act motivated by group prejudice with the intention to cause physical or psychological injury. These violent acts include intimidation, harassment, group insults, property defacement or destruction, and physical attacks. The targets of these acts are persons identified because of their race or skin color, gender, nationality or national origin, religion, sexual orientation, or the physical or social characteristic of groups defined to be socially significant. Classification begins when a group of people or in-group comes together under a common interest and excludes others, the out-group, that do not align with their values. Symbolization is when the in-group seeks to distinguish themselves from the out-group, whether by physical appearances, traditional differences, or other tactics. When a person's appearances, beliefs, or cultural traditions are deemed as inferior or something to be extinguished, anxiety and insecurities can arise for both individuals and communities alike. Many studies have been conducted that conclude that one of the most harmful effects of classification and symbolization is a negative impact on self-esteem. This can lead to various forms of anxiety and depression disorders. Discrimination happens when the more powerful group will begin to enact laws or policies that actively exclude the outgroup from certain rights. Once a people's rights have been taken from them, it is easier for others to see them as less than human, and this can result in forms of dehumanization. Furthermore, when a group is viewed this way, murder becomes less heavy on the conscience of the outgroup. One of the many adverse effects of discrimination on mental health is disruption of sleep. One study found that when daily experiences of discrimination happen, there can be a significant decrease in the individual's ability to sleep, which then impacts their ability to function during the day and increases their risk of anxiety, depression, and trauma disorders. One study into the dehumanization of in and out groups in South Sudan recognized low self-esteem and fear of death as main adverse effects. Low self-esteem and fear of death then may also lead to different forms of depression and anxiety disorders. Persecution begins when the in-group has gotten used to the dehumanization of the out-group and begins to act upon those ideals in violent ways. Extermination occurs when persecution has reached its full extent and the in-group intends to completely get rid of the out-group. A study was done with survivors of the Rwandan genocide to determine the mental health issues that resulted from exposure to persecution and extermination. Of the total sample, 11% met diagnostic criteria for PTSD, 19% presented with syndromal depression, and 23% with syndromal anxiety. Exposure to violent acts also relates to an increased risk of dementia. A major factor that was also found to reduce these effects was whether the victim was given to religiosity. Denial is when the perpetrator denies that the atrocities ever happened, even when there is significant evidence that it did happen. A perpetrator will deny their actions for many reasons. It is one of the harshest forms of gaslighting, with the intention of retaining innocence, silencing the victim, or even continuing the victimization after the events have ended. This not only has happened to victims of mass genocide, but it is also a frequent occurrence to victims of domestic and interrelational violence. The most prevalent impact on mental health is that it degrades the victim and increases the likelihood of self-blame and confusion, which can lead to many forms of anxiety and depression. Some protective factors to promote high resilience include marriage, religiosity, education level, and social support and family. We can use these factors to enhance our mental health programs for survivors. Orphaned heads of household, life after genocide, mental health, education, and social support of orphan survivors. This study found that 94% of people in the Rwandan genocide experienced at least one genocide event, including witnessing the execution of a loved one, rape, property destruction, and the fear of death. Many of these survivors were orphan children who had to take responsibility of their household. Results suggest that public health and community efforts to improve educational outcomes and to strengthen and expand social support networks may improve mental health outcomes of OHH. This research has been used to help orphan genocide survivors live healthy, normal lives with the hope that the future can look better than the past. Prolonged exposure therapy is mainly used for war veterans. This therapy utilizes the brain's ability to reform connections and associations of traumatic events so that the survivor reduces their risk to trigger explosion and anxiety and panic attacks. It has been adapted to fit various ethnic and cultural backgrounds as well as victims of multiple incident trauma. It is used both for post-traumatic stress disorder and preventative measures. Because there are similarities between the trauma of ethnoviolence survival and war survival, prolonged exposure therapy may be a viable option for past, present, and future victims of ethnoviolence.